Welcome to Life, bringing you insight and experiences into love, relationships, and fertility, with a focus on enjoying life and moving forward. On today's podcast, we'll be discussing the process and options in obtaining a donor egg with Gail Sexton Anderson. Welcome to Life, love, insight, fertility, experiences. Today we'll be speaking with Gail Sexton Anderson, CEO and founder of Donor Concierge. She's a board member of SEEDS, which is the Society for Ethics in Egg Donations and Surrogacy, and co-founder of Fertile, a new online platform for third-party fertility. Gail has been in the industry for over 30 years. She's seen transformation and been involved in innovative ways to assist those on this journey. Welcome, Gail. So nice to have you here today.
Thank you, and thank you for that nice introduction.
Oh, please. It seems like it's very well deserved. You've been in the field for so long and done so much and started this industry. I'm not even sure where to start. If you'd like, we could start with a little bit about your background and how you even started to get involved with donor egg.
Sure. So my background is that I have a master's in counseling from Harvard Graduate School of Education. And when my children were quite young, I moved from the East Coast to California, and so in many ways, my getting into the whole field of third-party fertility was sort of serendipitous, I guess.
Life can be like that, can't it?
My next door neighbor had an egg donor and surrogacy agency, and I thought what she did was very interesting, and I'd always been really interested in life science, and I wound up going to work for her, and I really enjoyed working with intended parents and with donors, because for everyone, particularly at that time, for everyone, it was this very Orwellian thing that, it's sort of a very strange thing. They all felt like they were the only people that were looking into this. And I really enjoyed helping them to feel more comfortable.
That's wonderful. And it's something that people still go through today in many ways.
Definitely, because it's not like that part has changed any. It's still, anyone going through it, it feels very much like they're very much alone.
It does. I think you may know I run support groups for people who are trying to conceive with donor egg and surrogacy. And right now I've recently started one for the parents after they've had the children.
I think that's wonderful. I've always felt like that was a really important thing to do.
It is. It evolved. They needed to still talk about it, and they wanted to have the support of others. So it's really quite a fabulous group, I have to say, because they talk about how happy they are with their children and how they would never change them, and understanding that baby wouldn't be there without them. But on the same hand, it's hard when everybody says, who does she look like, or who does he look like?
Right. And that's something that, I like to be able to share with many of our clients that are just getting started in that. To be able to, and sometimes they want to know that can they talk to someone, and of course people tend to be very private about that.
Yes.
And don't necessarily want to talk to other people, but I have every once in a while I'll have someone that's open to discussing, but it's a real challenge. And it's one thing if it's a gay couple, because obviously that's what they can't do this without a donor. But with heterosexual couples, quite often they don't necessarily want to be public.
That's such an important distinction, really, because you always just assume that a gay couple is using a donor egg, and there's no stigma attached to it at all.
Right, exactly.
And when you have a heterosexual couple, you look at the stigma associated. Same thing with a lesbian couple and sperm donation.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. I went to part of a conference of men having babies, and everybody was so open, and a lot of the egg donors were there. And there was a beautiful relationship between the parents and the egg donor.
There can be with heterosexual couples as well.
Yes.
That they're, we have a lot of couples that wind up either having a video chat or, having some sort of conversation, with the donors that they choose.
Yeah, I find with surrogacy especially, I'm actually going to be speaking to somebody on the podcast relatively soon who was born through traditional surrogacy and sees the surrogate a couple times a year, and he's in his 20s now, and it's like he describes it like a distant cousin. His mother is his mother, but this is just somebody who's connected to.
Right. As I always say, they're a genetic relative, but they're not the mother.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. So you were living next door to this woman, and you
Yes.
started
Yes.
working with these intended parents, and you
Hmm.
enjoyed, you enjoyed it so much and found it filling, such a need in our society that really does need help, of people who are willing to be involved. And then what happened next?
Well, I think what happened next is, and this actually still happens again today,
Hmm.
is that people aren't aware of the choices that they have. And so often they will go to a clinic and they'll be shown, just the donors that are in the internal donor program. And maybe, if they're part of a frozen egg donor program, then they can, check that out too. But they don't realize that they may have many other options. And I find it horrifying when I hear that, a couple has been waiting, a year, 2 years to be matched with a donor from their clinic's program because they do have other options. They don't have to wait all that time. Their clinic will work with donors coming from, agencies or another egg bank. There are things that, there are many options that they have, and they just don't always realize it. And I think the main reason I started Donor Concierge was because, at that time, it was a little bit like, this is what we have, this is what you should want. Even though in that little
Yeah.
shoebox, there wasn't someone that was a good, fit for any intended parent.
And it was all
Um,
closed. Is that correct at
yeah,
that
well,
time?
and it was closed, but it was also, it was just, yes, it was just sort of that there were more options that and they couldn't find someone that felt like a good fit for them. And so it started out with me saying, well, we don't have someone that really feels like a fit for you, but why don't you check out? And I named maybe a couple of other agencies that I knew to be good and reputable agencies and say, why don't you look there? And people would come back to me and say, I appreciated talking to you so much. I did find a donor and I feel so much better and we're now going forward. And that's what I enjoyed doing, is helping them find what they wanted rather than saying, here, take what I have because that's what I have. That's all I have to offer.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, it's really an interesting protocol. What I find with the people who I work with is that depending on the center, there's different protocols. And some of them
Mm-hmm.
will say, it's your responsibility to go to the egg bank and find somebody. Others will say, we will do the matching and we'll let you know when we have the correct match. And then there's another one that gives you a book and says,
Mm-hmm.
look through the book and see which one seems appropriate to you.
Right.
It
And
could
I
all
think
be a
things
little
are very
overwhelming.
different in New York than they are in many other parts of the country, because New York is the only place where you can't see any pictures other than maybe a childhood picture. Really, every other place you can see pictures. You can see
Yeah,
pictures of the donors at various ages.
I think that's
And
changing a little bit, just to let you know. I think it's changing just a
yes,
drop now, slowly.
I, I've seen that, and I think that there's sort of a new wave coming, and I'm happy to see that. And
Hmm.
certainly, we work, closely with a number of clinics in New York.
Right.
But traditionally, that's how it's been. I think
Yes.
that's very
Can we
frustrating.
talk about a little bit why that was? Do you know?
I really don't know why that was, because it is something
Mhm.
that is somewhat specific to the New York area.
It was
Most other
never
parts
on
of the
the.
country,
It was never in LA or on different
no, no.
coasts.
I've worked in this field for such a long time,
Yeah.
and um, you know, it, no, they showed pictures of donors at every age. From 20 some years ago, they were doing that. So that part, and maybe it was
Yeah.
California, but it's something where, at least at this stage, it's very rare that you can't see adult pictures.
Yeah, it's very interesting actually because I actually was just in touch with somebody who was asking me if there was some way I could assist because some of the doctors were having challenges in shifting their thought process from from
Mhm.
closed to open. And
Right. And I think the thinking actually was sort of feeling like showing adult pictures was exposing the donors too much. But I think donors, these are young women. They're on social media all the time. They don't have those same worries and concerns that maybe the doctor might have. And what I found is that they tend to be pretty open. And if they do have these concerns, that maybe that those are a few young women that maybe shouldn't be donors. It's not going to be something that every young woman's going to want to do. And so
that's
they
an
may
important point.
think about,
It's an important point.
yeah. So, but most of the young women who choose to be donors are pretty forward thinking.
Hmm. That's great. And the screening process, are they different for different centers, or are you involved in the screening process of the donor?
Not directly involved, but and yes, I'm aware that it's different for some centers but it's generally speaking, it's going to be the same sorts of things. They're going to, do they're going to do the AMH, FSH, and antral follicle count. They're going to probably test the donor for whether or not she's had any, drug use, that sort of thing.
And the psychological component behind it.
Oh yes, and all of them require that. Yes,
they
all
do.
of them require a psychological evaluation.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, from the intended parent's point of view, from the ones I've spoken to and from what kind of I've read in the field, there's a push-pull. There's the same thing, like they want to know, but they don't want to know. This is what, generally speaking, they want to know because they're very grateful to these people for helping them to have a child. They know that this is the person and kind of the gift that they're bringing them. On the other hand, they don't want them intruding into their family, or kind of taking over the role of the mother, which they can't do.
No, they don't want to. They have zero desire to do that.
They don't.
They and that's the interesting thing is that it's interesting that many donor applications, there'll be the question of, do you want to have any future contact? And for me, that's a red flag that maybe they have issues of attachment. And so I would always ask the question, why do you say that? And the answer I would inevitably get would be, oh, no, I'm not concerned about that. I just don't want them to feel like I want to interfere with their life. I want them to feel like, this is their child, because it is their child.
Yes.
So it isn't a matter of them, kind of having attachment issues, because if they have attachment issues, they shouldn't be a donor. It's more a case of they want the intended parents to feel that they're not going to interfere in their lives.
Right.
So.
And also with the changes and the adjustments, we had chatted about this briefly, with all of the genetic testing, it's difficult, I think, for people not to find out who they're biologically connected to as they get older, because the information is just out there.
Yeah, well, and anonymity at this stage is a myth.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I agree with that. So you started the organization or the company that you have. I find it fascinating because really I didn't realize when I first got into working in fertility that people could just have their choice of how they proceed, and that the protocols of a facility are their protocols, but should you say you want to go out on your own and find an egg or find a donor, you can do that and not wait the year or two, depending on the facility, but most of them would go along with it.
Right. And we work with, we help people find egg donors, sperm donors, and gestational carriers. And so all together we work with probably about, I think it's like 125 different agencies. So what we do is, we are the intended parents. We work as an advocate and liaison for the intended parent. They pay us a flat fee, and we will then, curate possibilities for them out of, what they're looking for. That primarily applies to the egg donor. Like, let's say, they have red hair and brown eyes, and that's something that's important to them. Find a donor that, has that same coloring as the intended mother. And so, we can then, go through, because we've developed our own internal database that has about 18,000 or more donors in there. And so we can help them find here across the country, here are the possibilities that could fit what you're looking for. And, then we share them with them, and then we help them with just kind of, managing through the process. Because I always recommend to any intended parent that don't think in terms of you're looking for the one, because then there can be sort of, you're putting so much importance on that one particular individual, where if something happens that she can't go forward, then it can be quite devastating. So I always say, look in terms of finding 3 to 5 possible egg donor candidates that you feel like you could go forward with. And that way, if something happens that, the first one on your list, for some reason, someone picks her 5 minutes before you do, it's not quite so devastating. You sort of say, okay, that was meant to be, or wasn't meant to be as my donor, and let's move on. And that way, in the end, you need to find someone who, meets the characteristics that you're hoping for, has good fertility, can travel to your clinic, and is willing to be a donor. So those are the things that are most important, and that you like her. Those are the things that I always kind of recommend. So it's sort of the perspective.
So do they meet them, or do they in person, or is it
Sometimes
they do?
they do. They don't often meet in person because that's not necessarily practical, but they may wind up having a video chat.
Uh-huh.
And that way it does feel a little bit more controlled, because usually there'll be someone on there to facilitate. Usually someone from the agency will be on there to facilitate.
Right.
And that way they can kind of get a chance to talk. Or sometimes they may ask the donor to make a little video of themselves just talking so they can sort of see her in live action. But it varies. That's not the standard thing, but it can be requested at times.
That sounds actually very nice. Very warm and very nice, and taking out some of this angst or anticipation of what the person is really like, and a lot of time and energy spent on worrying about it or thinking about it. How do you find these? I just wanted to back up, if you don't mind, for a minute. How do you find the egg banks that you use, or the people, and are you able to help people of all different nationalities and religions?
Oh, yes,
and races?
Absolutely. No, we tend to be the go-to, particularly when it comes to any minority nationality. Of course, we can find, Caucasian, Jewish, Chinese, East Indian, you name it. We've probably found it, or found people that are as close as possible to that, because we aim to find exactly what they're looking for. But, it depends. If someone's looking for someone who is Ethiopian, there's not a lot of Ethiopian donors or donors that have Ethiopian heritage. So you're very limited. So you may have to kind of expand that a bit. But how I find them is, I've been in this field for many, many years. And certainly SEEDS is an organization of, really for agencies, so that we can self-regulate the agencies.
Could you talk about SEEDS a little bit? I'm sorry, I'll let you finish the question.
SEEDS has been around for maybe about between 6 to 8 years, I think now. But it was organized as, it's a Society for Ethics in Egg Donation and Surrogacy. And I'm the executive director for SEEDS. That's sort of a new position for me, because I was not one of the founders of SEEDS. But
well, congratulations.
Thanks. But it was designed so that we can self-regulate, because, you hear terrible things that come up in the news, and there are basically so many more positive things that occur. But when you hear these terrible things that come up in the news about some agency that really is a bad actor, we want to take steps so that, if you are a member of SEEDS, then that means something. It's a little bit like Better Business Bureau, but it's specifically for egg donor and surrogacy agencies. And we also have many people that are in it that are attorneys, mental health professionals, and so forth. We all support each other in this. But the idea is to set standards so that there are known standards in that way, instead of it being sort of, people just go willy-nilly and do whatever they like. It's more a case of trying to make sure that there are some, good guidelines for people to follow. And most agencies desire, to do that, to do the right thing.
I was going to say, is there any type of, there's an organization also for hospitals called Leapfrog, which is a patient safety organization that's based in Washington. And they do the same thing for hospitals. Mm-hmm. They're able to have people go along with their standards because of the structure of the healthcare system.
Right.
How do we have people go along with the ethics and standards in this field? Because it seems to me like it's very important.
It is important, and we are still in the process of kind of getting some of these standards, in place, because as you go along, you find there are more and more things that need to be addressed. Mm-hmm. So one, we're really tightening up on who is allowed to be a member of SEEDS, as well as, getting these standards in place and actually having some, training modules for newer agencies, so that they can have, sort of a mentoring process of going through some training modules and learning and understanding what are accepted practices, so that they're aware of them.
That's great. It would be really good if there was another body to also enforce it, so that as opposed to it being a voluntary, it would be voluntary with maybe a little bit of pressure from
right. Well, you have to start someplace, and
you do, and
I don't want to wind up having it be a government regulated issue, because then you run into issues that where they're not really familiar with the whole field and how things are done. And so you wind up getting some somewhat arbitrary regulations that don't, really
I agree
shouldn't
with you from my
necessarily.
experience in working with these types of organizations. I do agree with you.
Yes.
It's just something to on my part. It's something I would think about. Not for you. You have
Yes.
enough to think about, but for me, it would be something to think about, because it makes me believe that if somebody has participated in seeds, then they've met a certain standard. And
Right.
that's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to have certain
Exactly.
standards in this field. And that would bring comfort, I think, to the intended parent as well
Yes.
as the donor.
Exactly. And that's something with, donor concierge, and I think most agencies, we try to keep the intended parent as our true north. That
Mm-hmm.
that the reason we're doing all of this is for the intended parent.
Right. And
And
ultimately
so,
the child.
yes,
Ultimately the
exactly.
child. So you've also involved in another agency. It seems like you're very busy, but all of the agencies are so great to talk about because they offer different services. And the other one that you're involved in is Fertile.
We have the software that we've developed, which we call Fertile. We will probably be taking that public in probably March. We may change the name of it just because we're not sure it really applies and feels right in terms of taking it public to the to intended parents. Because in many ways, donor concierge, we are very hands-on, and we are doing a lot of the hand holding and taking care of all of the issues for intended parents. But it tends to be something where, it's mostly going to be for people in a certain income bracket. And it was never my goal to only serve, people in higher income levels. I've always wanted to be able to help anyone who was trying to create their family. And so, Fertile, or whatever we wind up calling it eventually, will be a database that'll be a little bit more do it yourself. But, they would have the option to, if they wanted to, sign up to have maybe some coaching at, a certain fee, but that they would, because the agencies that we work with, because they trust us, because we've been, working with them for such a long time, we have more than 80 different agencies that have said, yes, they'd love to be part of that. And the main reason that they are willing to be part of it is because they trust us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that we want to be able to take public and make it easier for intended parents to know what their options are. And our hope is to eventually even have that be something where there'll be even frozen embryos, because that certainly is a
Wow.
much more cost-effective way for people to be able to create a family, and it's very much, I think, a win-win in many ways.
It,
So that's something that we're working on, sort of setting up connections. So just as we've done that with egg donor agencies, we want to do that with embryo
so
donation
with the
program.
frozen embryo, that would
Mhm.
be, if it was an intended parent, one of the parents' biological, either sperm or egg, and something from a donor on the other side of it? Or would
Well, it
that be
depends.
an embryo that's already formed from somebody, from
It's an
another
embryo
couple?
that's already formed, and it could have been formed either by the intended parents themselves through an IVF process, but now they've created their family and they have embryos that they would love to see, go to a nice family. And, there are ways that they try to make it so that it's a very positive experience for, both sides of the equation, the donating parents as well as the receiving parents. And or it could be embryos that were created through maybe the intended father's sperm and an egg donor.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of different ways
There
that
are.
can.
I was reading something about this new agency, I think, that was starting, that was talking about embryo adoption.
Yes, only we don't use that word,
Okay,
adopt.
yeah, because it was relatively controversial, and that's why I
Yes,
wanted to
yeah,
just bring it up to you.
yeah. No, so that's something that we consider to be kind of a no-no, though it does follow those kind of that philosophy in a way, but because of political, reasons, we call it donation. So, but
And I would imagine that we could all think of those reasons.
oh, absolutely.
So it's the shift is nice. The concept is there, but the shift is
Yeah.
very nice. And what's so fabulous about talking to you is just making possible all of these options to people to have the family they want. And through these conversations, I'm hoping to destigmatize a lot of it. so that people become comfortable, because people who use donor egg, at least on this coast, I know you said it's a little bit different on your coast, there's a lot of privacy that goes on. And I had somebody saying to me the other day she felt like a fraud because her decision is to tell the child before she tells everybody else.
Oh, I agree.
And you're walking around not telling your immediate family and other people how your child was conceived. So it's challenging on a lot of different levels.
Well, so this is what I tell people is I tell our clients, if they ask me about, talking to their children, I do recommend that they start from a very early age. I started reading to my children as soon as they could sit up.
Right.
Basically, you can, with your child, once they are born, you can put together your own little book, and you can do a very nice, sophisticated book these days with all of the different, photo options for creating books. And basically the stars of that book or the main characters of the book are going to be, the parents and the child. And if they have any other, children prior to, the conceiving, continuing to build their family through donation, then, they're in there too. So they're all the main characters. And then the supporting characters are, the doctors, the nurses, the donor, their extended family. And so it's a way to be able to tell that story from a very early age. That, and there are other books that are written that aren't specific to, the couple's own family. But I actually encourage people that if they are the one that is lucky enough to be carrying, that they start telling the story when they're pregnant. And it's not so much
I do the same thing. I ask them to start to tell the story in the womb. And and we talk about it as a group, and let's get comfortable with it. And
Absolutely.
Your child will become comfortable when you're comfortable. I actually wrote a couple of books that I'm getting illustrated for the donor egg process. And I
share them with me when you do.
I would love to. I'm just in the process of getting someone to illustrate them now. I was trying to get a few people who have gone through the journey. At any rate, I absolutely believe that people should start talking about it as soon as they conceive, and talking to their tummy while they're conceiving, or while they're going through the entire journey.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. So, Gail, thank you so much. I appreciate all your time. And if there's anything else you want to share, that would be great. And if not, I'm just going to thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. This has been a delightful conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime. And I have to thank you just in general for being in the field for so long and moving ahead with it, because so many people stay where they are and it's hard for them to move their beliefs. And just to see that you went from, working as a mental health provider to starting one agency and thinking you wanted to make it affordable for all, and starting another one is just a beautiful thing. And then to get involved in the ethics, I think is essential. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's certainly been my passion for a long time now.
Yeah, well, you've done a lot of good with it, so I appreciate it. If people want to get a hold of you, how would they reach you?
Well, they can contact our office or find us online, donorconcierge.com. And certainly they can always email me, Gail at donorconcierge.com.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again. And if anybody has any questions or any comments, please feel free to contact me at lauriemetz.net.